All right, good morning. Today we're going to pretty much be wrapping up chapter 6b. Our test is coming up on Friday. So we'll be on 6b.6. We'll talk about graphing both sine and cosine. We've already talked about the sum. We're actually not going to do all of the 6 examples. I'll just do the front side of 6b.6, and then tomorrow I'll post a video for the back side, or you'll be in class and we'll do the back side. But after we go over a couple examples, then I'll show you there's a delta math assignment for today where you have to graph. It's a little confusing maybe how it wants you to lay out the scale on the x and the y axis, so we'll do an example of that. So let's go ahead and get started. If we look here on 6b.6, you'll remember back to 6b.2, it's when we graphed sine, and 6b.3 is when we graphed cosine. So there was some sort of pattern. And when I say pattern, what I mean is every time we have sine of 0 on the unit circle, the y value or the sine value is always going to be 0. Okay. When we plug in pi over 2 for sine, that's at the top. Okay, 90 degrees, same as pi over 2 radians. That y value has a value of 1. Remember, our y is our sine on the unit circle. At sine of pi, it'd be 0. At 3 pi over 2, it's negative 1. Oops, that's not a very good negative sign. Let me fix that. And then finally, at sine of 2 pi would be a 0. Now, cosine's a little different. Okay, cosine of 0 starts at 1. Pi over 2 is down to 0. Pi is at negative 1. 3 pi over 2 is back to 0. And then 2 pi is back to 1. Okay, and both of those would complete one period or one cycle. Okay, so today we are going to talk about how to graph. Now, granted, we don't have phase shifts, which we talked about last time, but otherwise we have A, B, and C. Those can be changed to change our graph. So A, remember, is our amplitude, how much above and below the midline it goes. B will be used to determine what our period is. Remember, we always take 2 pi divided by B. That's what we get for our period. And then C is our vertical shift. If it's positive, it moves up. If it's negative, it moves down. Now, I always recommend, no matter what, just write out for yourself a little cheat sheet. What's our amplitude? What's our period going to be? And what is our vertical shift going to be? And that allows us to kind of make some notes before we graph it. So amplitude, very easy. Whatever's in front of sine or cosine. So here's a 4 with an amplitude of 4. Okay, period. Remember, is always 2 pi divided by b. In this case, b, whatever's in front of x. There is no number in front of x, which means it's a 1. So 2 pi over 1, which means our period is just 2 pi. And the vertical shift, plus 1 at the end there, so that's up 1. So I'm just going to put plus 1, which we know is up 1. Now, when we're graphing this, draw your y, your x-axis. And in our case here, it shifts up 1. So we know that the midline is going to occur here at 1. Now, it has an amplitude of 4, so it's going to have to go up 1, 2, 3, 4 above that, all the way to 5. It's also going to have to go 1, 2, 3, 4 below that, all the way down to negative 3. Now, in order to graph it, we also need to think about their intervals. So we always are going to have 1, 2, 3, 4 marks that we put. So it starts at 0, and then there's 1 for each of the following. So if we think it starts at 0, there's actually 5 spots that matches this pattern here. And to figure out what the label is here, always take your period and divide by 4. So 2 pi divided by 4 reduces to pi over 2. So that goes right here, pi over 2. If we added that again, pi over 2 plus pi over 2 gives us pi. Add it again, we'd get 3 pi over 2. Add it again, we'd get 2 pi. Now, we need to go ahead and graph it. So remember, it follows this pattern, but this 0 does not mean a y value of 0. This means 0 above the midline. So it's on the midline here. Meanwhile, 1 does not mean it's at 1. This means 1 amplitude above the midline. So the amplitude's 4. 1 times 4, it will go up 4 here to 5. Okay. Now the next one is a 0 again, so it's on the midline. Then a -1, so it'll be down 1 amplitude below. And then finally 0, it's back on the midline. So we draw that in. It's kind of curvy. Oops, let me fix that. My drawing, it's not that great. Okay, so and don't forget, this is just part. I'm going to put arrows on the end because it continues to go, but we have successfully graphed 1 period of this sine function. So on to the next one. Once again, this one is sine. Once again, I also recommend we always start by doing the same thing. So let's decide what is our amplitude. Hopefully you know by now that is 2, that 2 in front of sine. Okay, what is our period? Period is always 2 pi divided by b. In this case, b is 1/2. Remember, 2 pi divided by 1/2 is the same as 2 pi over 1 times the reciprocal, which is 2 over 1. So we will get 4 pi over 1, which is just 4 pi. Okay, then finally, vertical shift. In our case here, there is no vertical shift, so I'll put a dash. We know that because there's nothing added or subtracted onto it. Now, to find our kind of interval, we'll take the period. We always divide by 4. No matter what the period is, you divide by 4 to get your interval. 4 pi divided by 4 is pi. So we put in our x and our y axis. And now keep in mind, the midline here is going to be on 0. The amplitude is 2, so we'll have to go up 1, 2, up to 2. Also down 1, 2, down to -2. Now we always do 1, 2, 3, 4, and try to make them as even as you can, but it doesn't have to be perfect. So that's pi. If we added pi on again, 2 pi, add it again, we get 3 pi, add it again, we get 4 pi. Okay. Now, once again, sine, we're going to use this pattern, 0, 1, 0, -1, 0. So 0 means it starts on the midline. 1 means 1 amplitude, so 1 times the amplitude of 2 gives us 2. 0 is back to the midline, -1, down 1 amplitude, and then back to 0. And we are almost done. Just gotta graph that then, and put your arrows on the end, and you are done. Okay. Now, today we're going to do one more. Let's do this last one, example 3. This time it's cosine. So we'll use this pattern that we wrote down right here and that we found back in 6b.3. So once again, let's decide what is my amplitude, period, and vertical shift. So in this case, the amplitude, there's nothing in front of cosine, which means there's a 1 there. Okay. The period is always 2 pi divided by b. In our case here, the b is 2. 2 pi divided by 2 gives us just pi. Now the vertical shift is going to be 2, up 2. Once again, to find our frequency, once again, to find what our interval is, we take our period, which in this case is pi, and divide it by 4, so we'll get pi over 4 as our interval. Now, we draw in our y-axis, our x-axis, and keep in mind the midline is up 2. So there's where my midline is. Now, we can put these marks 1, 2, 3, 4, and we know it's pi over 4. If we add pi over 4 into that, we'd get pi over 2. If we add it again, we'd get 3 pi over 4. Add it again, we'd just get pi. Now it goes up 1 and down 1 from the midline because our amplitude is 1. So we need to go all the way up to 3 and all the way down to 1. Now, to draw it in, all we got to do, follow this pattern. So with the cosine pattern, it's a little different. Remember, we said it's 1, 0, -1, 0, 1. So 1 amplitude above will start us here at 3. It's always compared to the midline. So that's 1 above the midline. then it's on the midline, then one amplitude below the midline, then on the midline, and then one amplitude above again. And when we draw that in, try to curve it. It's not a straight V, even though it kind of looks like it would be. And there we go. We have one period done of this graph for example 3. Now, tomorrow in class, we'll talk about 4, 5, and 6. If you want to try those on your own, feel free to. The other thing I want to mention before I go is how to do the delta math assignment. So right here it says, on the axis below, make an appropriate scale and graph exactly one cycle, which we know means one period, of the trigonometry function y equals 3 cosine 2x. So let's go ahead down here. We'll just write some notes. So y equals 3 cosine 2x. And I'll put it in parentheses because that's how we've been doing it. Now, once again, it's up to you. You do not have to write this on your notes. If I were you, just pull some scrap out or flip to the back of the packet, find the space you haven't used, and make a few notes because I think it'll be helpful. Our amplitude we know is 3, whatever's in front. The period is 2 pi divided by b, so in our case 2 pi divided by 2, which will leave us just pi as our period. And our vertical shift is going to be non-existent. There is no vertical shift because there's nothing tacked on. Now, it's up to you. Our interval here, pi divided by 4. I like to find what that interval is. And we go back here. We are choosing what the labels are. So unless we have a massive amplitude and we don't have enough space, I say just make that y-axis 1. So I type in a 1 there. And over here, I like to do this. We found our interval, so pi divided by 4. And we click done. Now, as you can see, the y-axis numbers by 1. The goofy part is here, this point, we have to drag it where we want it. So I'm going to drag it over to the first blank. That's pi over 4. So that's saying each time we move over, it advances to the next one in our cycle, okay, in our period. Sorry, not in our period, in our pattern, okay? So if we look here then, it's cosine, so we know that we're going to use the pattern, shoot, it's frozen, oops. The pattern here, 1, 0, negative 1, 0, 1, okay? So, and we know that it is an amplitude of 3. So we will start up here. The midline was at 0, so we start up at 3. I'm going to just click a button right there. So 3, the yellow dot appears. Next, it would be 0. So it's going to be the same spot right there. So I click it, and it puts it on top. Next would be negative 1, which will come down here to negative 3. Next will be 0 again. And finally will be 3 again. Notice each time I moved over just one space because our interval here was pi over 4. So pi over 4, this would be pi over 2, this would be 3 pi over 4, this would be pi, which makes sense because that's what our period was. Now, if you mess up, you can hit reset. It'll clear it for you, but I am confident in this, so I hit submit answer. And as you can see, I got it. If you have any questions, it talks about several things here, and it tells you what's going on. Okay, so if you have any questions or need any help, definitely let me know. But that is all I have for today. So start working on this delta math assignment. And if you need some extra help, definitely let me know. I am happy to help you. And I will see you guys tomorrow.